So we've been waiting with bated breath, haven't we? Donald Trump saying the American military is prepared to carry out precision strikes in Iran's nuclear facilities, as well as potentially other political targets, including potentially even Iran's spiritual leader.
So apparently because of this, Keir Starmer has called an emergency Cobra meeting, concerned that the UK is going to be dragged into conflict between Iran and Israel.
We're asking this: should we take a stand, or should we stay completely out of it?
So let's speak now to the former head of counter-terrorism at the Ministry of Defence, Major General Chip Chapman, and former British Army officer Stuart Crawford. Good morning, gentlemen. Really interested to hear your assessment of this very tense situation and what it might mean for this country. Chip, let's come to you first. Where does this go next?
Well, the Americans will have a number of asks to the British, which is partly to do with basing. So, of course, Diego Garcia is one of those that if they project force and bomb people through, they would have to get UK authority to do that. The second one, and the worst case, really, from a British perspective in terms of an ask, would be if the Strait of Hormuz were to be blocked by the IRGC or the Iranian forces, because we have HMS Jafar up in Bahrain, which has a number of mine countermeasure vehicles, and they would definitely be an ask to try and clear a path. What I think will happen next, though, is quite right that we'll have a number of defensive measures because we sit alongside the Americans in Bahrain and in Qatar Al Udeid airfield. But what I think will ultimately happen is that tomorrow there's a diplomatic meeting with the Iranian Foreign Secretary, and my gut feeling is that the pressure strategy will lead to the Iranians once again drinking from the chalice of poison, because the bar for the Iranians is very low. It is regime survival and domestic security, and they will do everything to preserve that rather than being bombed into oblivion and potentially leading to regime collapse. So there will be asks. As a P5 member, there's a diplomatic aspect, but I don't think we'll be joining any American offensive strike were that to happen.
Stuart, if Chip Chapman's right here, and the Americans want to use this bunker-busting bomb, and they need to use the only planes that are licensed to fly the B-2 Spirit stealth bomber, would have to do it from Diego Garcia. If Britain refused that permission, that could thwart the President of the United States' attempts to destroy Iran's nuclear-making facility. Would that destroy, then, our so-called special relationship with the United States?
Good morning. Well, I think that Chip has touched on all the important points here. But if Britain, the UK, was to deny the Americans use of Diego Garcia, they can, of course, mount the same B-2 Spirit bomber attack from continental United States. It makes it more awkward, it makes it more difficult, it makes it more logistically challenging. But they've already got all the tanker aircraft for air-to-air refueling already have crossed the Atlantic and are now in Europe or the Middle East. So it still can be done. So the Americans, I suspect, will go ahead and bomb the nuclear enrichment facility in Iran. And I don't think that Britain needs to get involved in it because we actually don't bring much to the party. Although we, of course, are involved already because the Americans and others use our important base on Cyprus at RAF Akrotiri, which is an important staging post on their line of communications.
Well, might they need to refuel there, Stuart?
I beg your pardon?
Might they need to refuel at our British base in Cyprus? American
planes.
Oh,
I'm sure they do. Yes, absolutely, and they're not the only ones. I mean, it's a well-used staging post in the Eastern Mediterranean, and the Americans are there frequently, as we are, and as other nations. So that would not surprise me at all. And we're already involved because they're refueling their aircraft, for example, at air bases all over the UK, including at Glasgow Prestwick Airport, which, funnily enough, is owned by the Scottish Government.
And what do you both make of the Attorney General's assessment that actually there is no legal reason for us to get involved in this war, Chip?
Well, one of the things that you can say is that after the disastrous intervention in Iraq and Gulf War II, that we had the Chilcot checklist. And one of those parts is this legal? That would be the first question you'd ask prior to any intervention. But I think the first four questions which Chilcot asked are also important here. The first one is what is happening now? That's the current analysis. The second one is what might happen next. That's the scenarios, because you've always got scenarios rather than certainty. The third one is options, really what we're discussing, what we should do. And the fourth one, most important one, because the really important bookend of war is how it ends, which is policy and strategy. What do we see success looking like? They are the important questions. That is often difficult to articulate, because although the Israelis want to firstly get rid of the nuclear program, secondly get rid of the ballistic missiles, and thirdly destroy the proxies, the third they've already done, which has allowed them to do or carry on with 1 and 2, success would be a stable Middle East. And that's always very difficult to predict, particularly with how the regime will react, because one of the things about the the Iranian Islamic Republic is it's a pretty repressive regime, which will turn out the Basij, their volunteer militias, to kill lots of people. And it's when they stop killing those that you may get some sort of regime change or collapse. But I don't think there's any reason that they won't do that. And I think one of the indicators and warnings that we've already seen is, for example, internet connectivity going down to 5%, something they did in 2020 when there was a similar protest after the killing of Soleimani by Trump, actually, under his first regime.
And Stuart, if we were to become involved, maybe by just using Diego Garcia, what would be the downside for Britain?
Well, the downside could be that it brings us into direct conflict with Iran. And the aforementioned bases in Cyprus, of which we have 2, are well within ballistic missile range of both Iran and also its Hezbollah proxies. So that's a risk. There are threats to shipping in the Strait of Hormuz, which Chip has already mentioned. And also, it's only a few weeks ago that MI5 interrupted an Iranian terrorist plot in the UK, in London mainly, at the very last minute. So we would probably see more of that. So I think at the moment the risks of British involvement are greater than the benefits that might bring, even though we would always like to stand shoulder to shoulder with the US and indeed with their major allies in the Middle East, in Israel.
And Donald Trump, of course, was voted into power saying that he would end wars. He's very proud of the fact that there are no new wars under his last term in office. So do you get the sense that he doesn't want to escalate this, but Netanyahu is effectively put him in a no-win situation? Stuart, you're sort of laughing there. Go on, respond to that.
Well, I mean, I'm afraid nobody knows what Trump's going to do from one day to the other. And, he flip-flops and everything, tariffs on, tariffs off, immigration, deportations on, deportations off, and so on and so forth. So he's a loose cannon on the international stage, and nobody knows exactly what's going to happen next.
I think he's very easy to predict. I think he's incredibly easy to predict. I think if you watch Donald Trump, I think he's very easy to predict. And what you might see as flip-flopping, he would say, is his negotiation strategy. He likes to keep people he's negotiating with guessing, which is unusual, and that's why he does have some success. Chip, do you see him as a reluctant leader of a war?
I do see him as a reluctant leader of a war, but again, in international relations, you'll have to look at a thing we call game theory and what the payoff matrix is. The payoff matrix for Donald Trump, a win-win for him, is that Iran no longer has a nuclear file in the future. And secondly, the Middle East is reordered, because the difference between when we didn't allow the Americans to use bases, for example, in 1973 under a thing called nickel grass, when the Israelis were massively reinforced by the Americans in the 73 war, is that in 73 we were worried about the Arab reaction to us supporting the Americans. That is gone. Every Arab state, because again, you have to remember the Iranians are Persian and Shia, they're not Sunni and not Arab, they would like the theocracy in Iran to fall. So there are less risks than there were in 73. So those risks could be quantified on that. The only unquantifiable is how this really finishes.
OK, thank you, gentlemen. Really appreciate it. Major General Chip Chapman there and former British Army officer Stuart Crawford. Somebody's got in touch with Bev supports Russia now. She supports Iran. I don't support Iran. I think the regime is risible. Just ask the women in that country what it has been like to live under that regime.
Yeah, and if you're gay, they throw you off roofs.
Quite. So neither of us would do very well in Iran.
No.
I will not weep any tears over the obliteration of that regime in Iran.
However, you never know what comes next.
And it's also about the civilians, the
Yeah,
people who are just trying
yeah.
to live normal lives in
Yeah.
that country, taking the kids to school, filling the fridge, all that stuff.
Well, Trump will be hoping.
Think
of
about
course,
those people.
Trump will be hoping for regime change, but again, it doesn't always work like that.